does anybody here not know where Buckingham County is in relation to the pipeline? So I'm going to visually describe the pipeline. I have these great maps. I'm very disappointed that you can't see them because it helps to understand what we're talking about here. So everybody knows that the ACP starts in the shale. Yay! Okay. So it starts in the shale fields of West Virginia, and these, and then there's 3 compressor stations all along its 600-mile route. So there's only 1 per state, and so this is the West Virginia one, and then this is where they've made it very bright green because that's where it comes down to Buckingham. Now, what happens in Buckingham is that the existing Transco pipeline, which has 4 pipes already in it, and Tom will tell you more about that. I am not going to talk about anything that Tom can tell you better, except to say that the reason why they wanted to find, they needed ACP's business plan was to intersect with the Transco, and he'll tell you a lot more about why that's even more concerning than we always thought, because of the WB Express. But let's leave that for now. And the idea was that then they could, at this Transco intersection, then use Transco, basically rent Transco space to then get to the ACP's Cove Point LNG facility. And you remember hearing about LNG facilities can't do eminent domain seizure, but these can. So then it goes south from Buckingham, and then right at the, and unfortunately I had a better map because this ends it at the North Carolina border, and actually part of the compressor station's in Virginia. I just found out, and the rest of it's in North Carolina. That's how close it is to Virginia. And then imagine that there's a whole part that's down here that goes from that North Carolina down to supposedly the terminus, which is in Prospect, North Carolina. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that. But at this, there is going to be, they're already talking about the South Side Connector. And so, okay, why do we call the Atlantic Coast Pipeline the map of injustice? Because at every single major piece of infrastructure, so you've heard all about the pipeline, I'm going to talk to you about the other parts of the infrastructure that are the compressor stations. I can't tell you anything about the LNG facility. I'm not an expert on that. But these 3 compressor stations are all enormous. When Al Gore was just with us in Buckingham recently, he went so far as to say that the Buckingham compressor station would be the largest compressor station in the country. Now, I'm not going to argue with him. I'm just going to say that's what he said. But I think there may be other ones that are similar. So they have applied for 54,000 horsepower. Why does that matter? Well, these are gas turbine fired. It means that at this site, so imagine this is about 200 miles, that's about 200 miles, and then it keeps going on down south to the terminus. It has to get the gas moving. This is the way the gas gets moving for 200 miles. Now imagine, you've heard all about the steep slopes, you've heard all about the deep valleys, you've heard all about the water crossings, the under the rivers and all of those. It's got to do that, and then it has to step itself down to get to those huge turbines, right? And then step it right back up again. And they've applied to do it at the highest allowed PSIs of pressure. So imagine it, because it's got to go a long distance, right? So think about this place as, I'm sorry, ground zero of the entire ACP, right? Because it's going there, got to step down, got to go up, now it's got to step back up again, it's got to get into the Transco. Okay. So why is this the map of injustice? And maybe you all know that we held this People's Tribunal after the Charlottesville incidents that went on, the outright racism, the state standing aside and doing nothing, literally, those of you, I was there, those of you who were with me there. you basically saw state police just standing there doing nothing, being very close together in their riot gear while we are in danger of our lives. And one of our, citizens was killed, and over 30 people gravely injured. So we just saw that this lack of willingness to act, to stop environmental injustice for the pipeline, for the compressor station area, which I'll go more into those details in a moment, felt like it was similar. We'd been trying to get the governor interested. We were trying to get the Senate. We were trying to get the, representatives. We were trying to get the state, and it was all just as if, there's no problem here. We're just going to stand aside and let this all just happen to you. Now, what is this? So, the compressor station in Union Hill, and I want to point out Hanuman here, Kenda Hanuman, can fill in, and I'm asking you to please, because I don't even have my slides, so I'm going to forget things. But Kenda's been involved from the very, very beginning, helped us start Friends of Buckingham, and co-chair for years. And so what happened was that Dominion bought a piece of land, 147 acres, at an intersection of the Transco, right? And it was in Buckingham County. 147 acres, and it was, well, I won't say more about that, but it turned out that it was right next to one of the county administrators' land. So they were looking for a backup. They only paid $225,000, I'm going to say only, $225,000 for 147 acres for that parcel, right? Well, they couldn't use that one after they bought it, so they had to look for another one. They found another one at the intersection of the Transco, but it was only 68 acres, and it was surrounded closely. So it's a triangular shaped piece of property that was just carved out of a larger, that is still, parts of it are still owned, but it's populated on all sides of that. There's roads that go all around it. And on the long side of the pyramid, really, if we're talking about pyramid, is Route 56, which is a major north-south route in Buckingham. Again, if I had the map, I'm trying to be a map for you. It's not really working. But so it's 68 acres, right? And here's the Transco right through the apex of that pyramid. Now, if I could describe to you what they plan to build there. So it's 68 acres. How much less is that than 147 acres? It's less than half, right? Less than half the size, surrounded on all sides by people. They paid $2.5 million, or $37,675 an acre in Union Hill, where the going price was $3,000 at the moment. So this was, to put into this place a huge amount of infrastructure, right? So we're concerned about a 42-inch pipeline, right? And we rightly so, and you heard every reason why we should. But at that place, we have the intersection of the Transco, right? Underground there, that's 4 pipelines already, right? Then the ACP, the new one, 42 inches, they're intersecting. There are, at highest degrees of pressure. So in this 68 acres, imagine half again as much. They plan to build only on the northeast side of that pyramid. So we're talking in a little 32-acre part. There are all of those engines I told you about, that intersection of all the pipes. We're talking about the metering and regulatory station. Remember I said it has to slow it down and then speed back up again? That in there. They want to have 2 above ground and 1 underground storage tanks, which will have diesel gas, ammonia, and methane. And so, the gas itself. And so then that is also there. And then imagine in that small half of a pyramid, you also have wetlands. known wetlands that are on the National Registry of Wetlands over a huge part of it, and all of the part where it intersects with the Transco. Now, in the county of Buckingham, like here, every single person, their only source of water is individual wells. And that is the shared aquifer. That's where the water is in that same ground that's being shared by those pipelines, by the underground storage tank. And so the problems of leaking that you heard about, think of the scale of that. So what happened was, when they chose this second site as their first site, instead of the larger one that is very sparsely populated, they said, actually lives here. There's nobody here, absolutely nobody here. So we got the first application for the ACP August of 2015, was it right? September of 2015 was the first application that had details, right? And that one had what's called the cultural resource reports, the initial cultural resource reports. So this is where I came in to going, okay, I've got to get going, because they were just going to use the census tract for the entire average of Buckingham County, which has a very low average number of people, 29.6. And that's what Dominion claimed was at the site of the compressor station, right? That's their report. It's just, don't see anything, it's just the average of the whole county. There's actually no, that was first, and then they said there's no history. So those of you who saw that report, you saw that there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of cultural resource reports, photographs, all, this whole area, from particularly this leg right here, had just hundreds of pages. Houses, churches, bridges, you name it, right?
Graveyards.
Well, graveyards. Guess how many pages there were for the entire county of Buckingham? I mean, just give me a ballpark guess.
3. 2,000.
There were exactly 2.5, but they were of the exact same thing. It was 3 homes, 2 of which were the same, and one of them isn't even in the county. Okay, no whatsoever mention of anything to do with the compressor station, which I just told you, right? It's got 3 routes all around it. Now let me just back up for a second. There's so much to say about Buckingham's history. Buckingham, so again, 0. There's no history, folks. There's nothing here. And there's not even anything in this compressor station neighborhood. I mean, it was 0. At Yogaville, I work on the eligibility nomination for historic to be on the National Register. And we got a 1-line mention, right? So that was like, okay, well, but we're not going to be harming anything to do with the Lotus Temple, which had absolutely nothing to do with our application, by the way. It was about the whole thing, the idea, the way we use landscape, all of those things. Well, it's going to be, if it's a mile from that, which actually isn't even true. So there's nothing here. There's nothing in Buckingham to ever worry about. So for the compressor station, 0, zilch, nothing. So not only had I lived in Buckingham a long time, but then I got my PhD while I was there, and it's in anthropology. And a lot of, at the university. Yeah. And one of the things is you do a 4 fields approach. So I did an archaeological dig. I actually brought the dig to the James River crossing of Wingina, because that's where we used to land our plane before we built an airfield at Yogaville. There was an airstrip right there, and I got to know the owners, very well actually, and they started showing us all these pottery shards and all these things. Okay, now I'm in the PhD program, and they're interested in Virginia archaeology, and I'm like, there's this pretty. And what happened was they did that dig, and really found evidence that it was Monahasana. which is one of the 5 Monacan villages mentioned by the very unreliable John Smith in his diaries. But in any case, there's pretty much agreement, and now the Monacan, and not just because of that, but the Monacan are now federally recognized. Okay, so we know, and of course that wasn't actually in the cultural reports either, which I thought was really interesting, because they're crossing the James, and what it is the Monacan settle on both sides of the James, just like the colonists settled on both sides of the James. The James is the highway, right? So as you know, that the ACP wants to go under the James River, horizontal drilling under the designated historic scenic James River, right at Yogaville. It's on one of the members' property. And it's a historic site, not just for the Monacan, but because of the colonial settlement there on both sides. Okay, so now we find thing there. So what I did was, we have to find out about this place. We've got to get some history. And then I learned, which I hadn't learned in the years prior, that on February 26, 1869, when Buckingham was under military law, during the Reconstruction, on that night, the Congress had passed the 18th Amendment, giving formerly enslaved people the right to vote. And all across the South, in counties just like Buckingham, where there were far more formerly enslaved people living than white people, at least 2 times more, and of course, it just had been men, but in any case, they burnt the courthouse to the ground across the South in counties like, why? Because, and this I read in the contemporary papers, even of Buckingham, they felt like the white plantation owners felt that they were going to be asked to pay reparations, right? We're talking about reparations now? Well, they were really talking about them then. That they stirred up a lot of fear about it. Even as part of Reconstruction, 40 acres and a mule, that was the plan until Lincoln was shot. So there was that fear. So what is in the courthouse? Well, English law, which is how you get an identity, right? In the wills that people passed on their slaves to their family members, in those days, people would have identified an actual person who that was, because they were still there. They were still alive, or they were their mother, or they were their aunt, or whatever. They could be identified by their owner, who would have to pay reparations if this were to happen. So we got to get rid of that, right? That's got to go. So they just burn the whole thing to the ground. So that is a huge issue for finding things. So how do you start? Well, there was a deed. There was a deed of sale for that land, that's 68 acres, and on that deed, strangely enough, Variety Shade LLC. And there was a phone number. So I call the phone, and I get a hold of a descendant who lives in Texas, and I say, what's your family connection to this land, and what is Variety Shade? And they said, well, there was a plantation there called Variety Shade. We're the bondurant. And then you go, okay, I have a lead. And that's how anthropology works. You have a little thread, and you just keep pulling on it, and you see where you can go. Well, here's another thing that would strike against Buckingham. All of those plantation owners, very wealthy. It's hard for us to even understand, because Buckingham is so poor now, right? This was an incredibly wealthy county because of slavery. They had tobacco. These were tobacco farms. They also did wheat and corn. And so I'm going to jump ahead. So when those were all destroyed, their records were all destroyed in the burning, over time, those families had their own records, right? They had ledgers, just like Jefferson did. They kept very close ledgers, wills, they have things. They want to protect them. The family wants to keep them to pass along. What do? They go to the University of Virginia, the nearest prestige university that has ways to keep their family documents in the right temperature, by the way, and down there. And so they closed those boxes. They put them in, and they wouldn't let anyone look at them because they had direct enslavement, right? So very incredibly gracious African historian named Senior, almost 50 years ago, decided to try to fill in these gaps. He went to that special collections and was gay. He's a man of color, and he did not get access. But luckily, came along the time, and I probably would have been led into my PhD from anthropology in that program, and that's where white privilege, right? Before that, even before I got to exert my white privilege, the director of the said, no more. We're not any boxes that aren't available for education information. This is like a service that we're doing for people. We're an educational institution. So variety shade, I could go bond and start. And a network of plants where they had all intermarried. They, in this day of these, were Huguenot refugees that the king had given land grants to be safe here in it wasn't the Commonwealth of Virginia, colony of Virginia. So Buckingham is at the center of some interesting pieces of history. Right? So the Huguenot refugees are given land grants, both governors, and Monroe, those are the places where the Compressor Station location is. The place of the gold rush. No, Buckingham had a gold rush. Miners from Wales. So another property owner are descendants of those and their names. And everybody, there's sons on both of the color line. Another thing. The other way you can do it. Look at the names that people are descendants of the people living there, descendants enslaved. You look at their last name. That's a way to look in those plant boxes. That's called it, right? You have something, follow it, because we have. The people themselves do not have those documents. They have oral histories. So next what happened was that we had to fill in the evidence because of the need, right? But it's not a way. The National Environmental Act has very clear descriptions what FERC is supposed to do in this. Anytime there's this kind of development like this, to hold in every what's called a scoping meeting. They're supposed to invite scoping meeting, leaders of church, the teachers at the high school, just the politicians, anyone able to come to these scoping meetings. Buckingham was the only county that they did not hold a meeting in. That they just ignored it. Thing with the Department of Environmental Quality did not hold got to the air permit, but I'll get to that. So we didn't have that chance to tell them, wait a second, this compressor station is so smacked up against all these people. We didn't have a chance to. So that was out of the picture. And that was supposed to be step one. So then all we have is the FERC environmental impact, and they agree with, with Dominion that there's 29.6 people per square mile. So this is when the community participatory research project came in, and so I'm the only person here who worked so much. So again, was key to this because census is very inaccurate. And in fact, Governor in January did an executive order to do work on the census issues with the African Americans because they're so deeply under, and there's many reasons for that. But I can tell you what the reason in that. That I'm talking about, that's it, is you just don't open the census. You don't open the people. In fact, if they don't know you, and this is interesting because I learned about in indigenous communities, right? You drive up, you wait a second, get out of the car, and then they see who you are. Then you walk up, knock, right? And so if they don't know you, have an interest in you, then they don't, or you'll see the curtain and back. So that it had to be a community participatory model, right? So even I'd lived there, been there since 1979. I didn't actually know the people of Union Hill because the folks that who were in African clusters again, were open to Yogaville, right? But there was a whole people, African American folks that were part of churches who thought, these people. And this is not just African American. A lot of people in the South, yoga is some sort of devil. And so nothing to do with us. And a bunch of other folks that I worked with closely, right? They were really good friends. But it wasn't that community. So coming into this, like I could say, well, yeah, let's go to the doors. No, that would be not what to do. So we had been meeting for a while. Many people from the community who are African American had been coming. And then we had to discuss how could we out the things we need to know. We need to know full numbers of people. We know what the census didn't do, right? We have people in your house to ask, what are their ages? Needed to ask about race, and that's almost a stop. Because as we found out, and we really discussed this before, now it's probably hard for people to understand. It's really hard for white people to understand. I had to, I had to be brought to a whole different way. And this was the actual stuff, because that's when we found how many of the people who found this are the descendants of people who were enslaved. Nobody talked about it. They didn't talk about it that way with each other. It wasn't like we're ourselves freedmen. They had claimed back that term from the Freedmen Bureau days, places that are far in touch with power movement and how can we leverage these things into a conversation. It was through that study we understood why to even have race. It wasn't a survey. It had a conversation like you're in hours, or if they don't want you to. But then, you say, well, we need to ask about race. It's your identified race. It's not Phil's. It's right. How does this make sense to you? And then that's right. We had your utter confidentiality, where my PhD came in, because I've always in medical settings. So I apply everything we learn about the horrors of Tuskegee syphilis on African men for 70 years, and then you apply it to everything you do. And if people don't want mapped there, anything to do with their family, no names, nothing about the household, and nothing about health condition. So we were asking about exist conditions, because that should have been a lever as well in terms of NEPA, right? Those were all for that, and as well, because Compressor Station is slated for an agricultural zone. So remember back to the tobaccos and remember back to the time when they got all the from those. Well, this zero industry in it. But what that means is air quality is so, they've been such good of their land there that actually Dominion could apply to put more at this compression than in the other two existing industrial sources, toxic chemicals, right? So slam, we're going to get your history against you. Now, if you are primarily descendants of slaves that are living there, but you've lived in place alongside or by the people whose families had enslaved your ancestors, things are a whole lot than a neighborhood in Harlem. Just different. Like you don't about race, you don't talk about discrimination. People have figured out to survive. Those lands are passed down. The African American family found out every year, happens all over the South, there are hummings, where these legacy lands are passed down and kept family. Now picture, what do you think the value of those lands in terms of they're passing down? They're valueless now. That even $3,000 wouldn't be paid for that location now. So hummings that are held every other year. And they're all around the churches. Everybody goes to the graveyards. You'll drive down, and suddenly there's this bunch of cars, and you go, okay, I'm coming. They're back in a graveyard, back in the woods, and there's nowhere to pull. So the road is just cars. That's homecoming. That's when you talk about things. But day to day, never do it. So we needed to know what are they using their land for, because we were going to stop the darn exemption for putting this in an A1 zone, right? So it's going to show you the beautiful map based on those everybody's houses. What are you growing food? Are you growing animals? Orchards, so what is your agricultural uses of your land? And then flat out could not ask about slavery. That never asked, where are your ancestors buried? It became a way to enter that conversation. So if it's in the woods over here, okay, then you can talk about that. But until you do that, you can't. So this has been years. So now about freedmen, we call Freedmen Community. We call Union Hill. They didn't call themselves Union Hill. The church was Union Hill Baptist Church. It became Union Hill. Now we stand with Union Hill, but they didn't call themselves freedmen or Union for that. That's what happens in the of movements. Okay, so we of course lost that special use permit. The Buckingham supervisors, we found out, had not even just that, the whole had accepted so many from Dominion that they say that's how they built the engine building. And this was like years. So with that, we didn't have any with any of the boarders because anyone who had this concern about it left in the election cycle, came up to vote. And so we had one person who had served before and one person who had a chair of the Board of Supervisors who had worked for Dominion for years. And so he onto that board. I'm sure wanted him to do that, and he's the chair of the Board of Supervisors. So, okay. So I've told the density of the things that are there. Found out was that it was 500% more densely populated. And that people were living within 150 feet of the boundary line of this. So now we're talking back to their wells, right? This became our evidence. This became why Reverend came. This is why, because this is environmental injustice. What I will say is that the Appalachian people, former coal families, you know, who have been exploited, you know, for generations, the people along this line, because you heard from at this compression, they are, because they, oh, sorry, see, this is why was it so that it needed to be depopulated? Because PHMSA classifications is in, and also, if you have a large population, majority African American, NEPA kicks in, right? And the new policy says they're of using SUNT data because it's often artificial dilutes luster of minority people. So that's exactly why they did it. It's like no black people, no black people, so, and right up until now, there is no environmental issue there, and all resting on is dueling. So study that I led that was, you know, a bunch of people. I didn't go to it. It was like the community members with a student VA went and did this work. And when we analyzed the data that came up with, and when that was contested, really short window for a new public comment period based on the compressor station's air, and it's called by the Air Board. And if any of you want to know more, but that's a huge trend that happened. At our first, there were two of that Air Board who were studying or bringing up issues of environmental injustice, and 3 days later they moved. So then it was 4 instead of 6. And before vote at that first meeting, we could kind of feel like if this vote came up now, we might even have a tie. We might tie, and a tie is a lot. Would have been a lot. So instead, one of those 4 members, who actually is a consultant on getting around permit or job, she's a lawyer who does that, called for a postpone. Let's call for a postpone. And then 2 days later, 2 members who were the most vocal, but also one left, but then she ended up being a weak pin. She couldn't stand up to the other 3. Okay, but during that short window, able to get peer review, you know about academia, was able to get outside review of the study so that it wasn't just Lakshmi, yeah, maybe she has a doctor, big deal. You know, she's an activist. You know, therefore, can we trust these numbers? So I worked during that in time, and it was holiday. It was so cruel. Did it over the whole holiday, and I'm a grandmother of little girls. That was how I was planning to spend my holiday, I'll tell you that. But I had to get the peer review in, because that was what it was resting on, was how reliable a study that I had led versus the lies. In fact, reviewers wrote an article calling how to lie with maps, because it was so completely, it was active information. So then, as you know, we lost. So wait, there's so many things I want to. So at this, you heard about the coding and the health issue. Again, I'm not only a metallurgist, but I'm most of my career was spent at. So right away know what the existing health were, because every single thing you read about the fracking and what's in the pipes and what goes through gets worse all the time. Because before, everyone relying on industry data, but they make proprietary in the pipeline that they used to frack. So you'll know how to frack, right? Like water, just huge groundwater, breaking up the rocks at incredibly intense pressure. And then they have chemicals to bond that together. And those chemicals, each one of them will, and guess, they're in the pipes. So let's filter all these things out. Possible 88 different toxic chemicals that are in pipes along with the bubbles of gas that are now together, right? So, and the only reason we know that is because of these explosions and the leaks. So scientists have been able to study because they're getting access. Otherwise, they can't, right? And they are doing studies of the air around compressor stations. So I'm disappointed I don't get to see the 3-minute video of Pramila Malik about the mini sink or compressor station, because it's 12,000 horsepower. So a fifth the size, whatever that is. And again, horsepower is just indicative. It's about speed, pressure, size of pipes, things like that. They're in an urban, so actually their pipes, are, but because I had to erase the population, 75% thinner pipes at the compressor station for the ACP, because they're still going with that sense number, and they have already said that the valves are 14.7 miles apart at that place where all of that is going. So 14.7 miles apart. So all the contents would have to be expelled into the air or into the ground, depending on the medium of that leak, that you stop it. If there's a fire, you can't stop. So at that place, people living right around it on all sides, you are calling. So how can I say the level of humanity and lack of protection, and our state is complicit. This in terms of our this in terms of our governor, state in terms of our legislators, who have it up because they're paid, right? So, yeah, health issues are so great where to start, and I don't, it's 12:15. I guess I've been going for half an hour, but yeah, there's so many, yeah.
I keep coming back to this fault site.
Yeah.
Which is 2 miles away from you.
Yes.
Hill. And it was next and adjoining into county super plan.
No, it was the administration. I mean, I'm guessing because nobody will explain to us why that was taken. And in the FERC, EIS, and I just wrote this up. If you're ever, all this is in a research and one of my comments, and the process of writing all of this article to publish, because there's much, right, and it's hard even to remember. But in the EIS, FERC said at that other site and they only minions information. So it doesn't say it's 147 versus 68 or actually 30, because it's all on one side of the train. It doesn't say that. It only says that with the first, they call it the Midlands site versus the preferred site. Was Midlands? That's right. So the Midlands, the reason why Dominion didn't, they totally supported them, and was that it would 1 mile more of construction pipeline, 1 mile more, and we'll talk about that, and 0.02 more footprint. So the 2 reasons. Did a side-by-side, and you can research report, because the original, in that twice the size, not only is the census much the general average of Buckingham, much closer, it is white, but okay, so that would have taken care of those, but it has about the same amount of west, but it's 146 acres, and these are actually in this acres, and even to the National Register, other ones, because it's all about everybody relying on Dominion's information, which they are going to falsify, just use every method that they can to their advantage. And so, that's the central point, is that...
There's one other thing related.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously this is an industrial facility, right? But Dominion onto the property through the zoning board saying that they were a utility, which they are not, to get a utility exemption to put this onto an actually zoned property. And they applied to the air quality permit. We're not a utility, which was correct, but that allowed them to qualify for lower levels of regulation. And in fact, what I heard early on, you may know more about it than is that there was an industrial parcel in County South adjacent to the pipeline, which would not have had any zoning problems, which wouldn't have had
Was on the
surrounding
Transco.
population problems. It might have involved, one of the easy things, there was one parcel of land that have several. So you use the property, get the whole deal. So reasons for Dominion to do it, but it's a backwards way of selecting a project. This whole pipeline was designed in a week and a half by two people.
Yeah.
So-
Without ever leaving the office.
Without, yeah, right, no
Design.
fee.
I guess my comment is that the alternative site would have taken the whole controversy, not completely off the table, but lessen the controversy because of the further distance that site was from the Union area.
Well, probably of course, but the thing was, when they were doing all of these, when the Board of Supervisors was getting in, they were denying these issues even existed, that there were anybody there or a history or of those things. So all of those nulls were what was being supposedly decided on. And I have all the transcripts, and Hanuman's read all the transcripts of those, and it's just heartbreaking. The law that Dominion's boards of supervisors members, they were asking questions, and Dominion's person actually led them to believe that this was inevitable because the pipe was already in the ground. Pipeline had already built. That's in the trips, and I was there. We were there. And then you're sitting there in the room, just wanting to explode because you see that out, and I mean that's such an obvious. And the question is, we had to ask, why didn't anybody do their field research? We had boards of supervisors in the past. I used to go to all the boards of supervisors meeting when I lived at Yogaville just because I wanted to know more about the county. Just that kind of person, right? And we had great boards who said, no, we cannot burn toxic waste in Buckingham because are you going to go out there at 2 in the morning and find out if they're keeping to their regulated amount? I'm not. Are you? I'm not paid. Are you? And they said no. So we had a board of supervisors that was all new for the employee of Dominion and one more person, and they didn't set boots out. They didn't want to talk with us. We met with a couple of the planning commission members, and they pretty interested. Tom went, all of us meetings with them, and they came pretty good. The planning commission came up with some pretty good mitigations, you would say. Okay, you can build it, but you have to do this, 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 and this, right? And the night before the planning commission voted, Dominion announced a memorandum of understanding with the kyanite mine, which is the largest employer, the wealthiest people. I mean, they're gabillionaires. Kyanite's in all of our computers and phone and all of that stuff, company, that they work with Columbia District Line to get kyanite. And the county was like, now we'll have jobs. Now we'll have an industrial park. Do you think that is ever going to happen? Because it cost $5 million then. You know what it costs now. And Columbia Pipeline is that had all the explosions up in Massachusetts. That distribution company had so many problems. Why? Because you have 42-inch pipelines, right? Like the ACP there, going to these small pipelines. They think that was a big factor, was their issue. And by the way, I'm not, I went to an amazing presentation by these two women from Harvard who studied it was very difficult to do. The Columbia wouldn't provide maps where, so this is all hidden. It's all, you have to do FOAs, it takes a while. And they finally were able to map the leaks, and then they were able to measure the amount of those chemicals, remember that I told you are coming up in gas while they're making their tea. we are none of us not affected by this. Some just more than others. So shocked. We're saying, gas, we've got to get out of gas, right? Oh, with your, and everyone thought, gas, this is so great. I have a gas oven now. But now, they talked about restaurants are all going to those induction because issues with, and also with gas. So there are so many issues related to the health, and I won't even, because at these compressor stations, they have to do regular blowdown or emissions escape, and they have to, just to ensure that the safety in a way. And they lied about how many there would be to the Board of Supervisors, and we have a record. But they're going to have hundreds of them, and then there's the accidental one. So this video is going to show you for one that's like width or the size. They are able to know when there's a blowdown because they have odorant in it. It's sort of like when you're gas off, but then you can smell it. Odorant. Compressor station, there will odorant. They applied and got the ability to have no odorant in it. So people won't know that way. They'll know only by their bodies. So what Pramila is that they know when one, because people getting nosebleeds or they get asthma and they can't breathe anymore. And some of them in this compressor station live quite close as well, like we will have here if this gets built in Buckingham. It's more urban. So the health issues are particulate matter. They're not measuring. And if you know about particulate matter, that's smog basically. The fine particulate matter is why everybody worries about smog, why it caused all the problems in London those years. And there's fine and larger grained particulate matter. There's benzene, any amount of which is so toxic that they can't even give a safe amount of that. The hugest problems at this compressor, which was part of Southern Environment Center's comment. So there's many people that they have as clients, as like groups. Friends of Buckingham is one of their clients, and on the case of the compressor station, they are doing it for environmental justice, but also because of that they're at such levels, and also because of the contribution to climate change. So this particular compressor station, does anybody know, I have it written, what is its single contribution to climate change? It's just unbelievable because of the numbers day in and day out. It's year after year, and it's this intersection. So we're talking about chemicals you cannot live with that are now going to be in the air where once beautiful agricultural zone moved there back from their legacy family area and bought land and built their houses to retire there. That's why it's primarily elderly and very little kids, because this was another artifact that no one could have known unless we went door to door, which is that, as you know, probably everyone knows, the public health, that African American people are far more likely to have asthma and diabetes. What you may not know is their relation to environmental, that African Americans are far likely to be living near a toxic source of pollution. And toxic pollution doesn't just affect asthma, it also causes diabetes. Did we know that? Only because we have so much pollution now that we at onsets of diabetes related to living near these sources. So we found out that we had this elderly population because there's no jobs, right? It's Fjord County, so people back or way along, and then they're living there, elderly people. But their grandchildren and great-grandchildren who have asthma problems because they live in a city are living with them. So it's a discriminant, very young and disproportionately very old. Last thing, I keep saying last thing. At the moment, I don't know if anybody else is going to talk about this in the legal things, but at the moment, on behalf of Friends of Buckingham, and that's the only plaintiff, has filed suit against the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality and the Air Pollution Control Board for their decision to pass that air permit under these conditions. They have like 6 points into them, but you can guess based on the things that I told you: the environmental justice, the climate change issues, and the high rates of certain emissions of nitrous oxide, for example. And they're joined on that lawsuit by the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. That's just an update. And the other thing is, as many of you know, Reverend Barber was asked to come like years back, and it was only recently that he sort of came to us and said, okay, that now it's clear, and now it's a air board, the lead up and all the signatures and these open letters, but now it's become a hashtag, it's become, kind of a national thing. We are all Union Hill. So they came, but I want to say there was that evening event, but there was a small event that was held at York Church, because almost no one in Buckingham County other than our group has come forward to help us. So we were happy that all these other people were getting them and meeting with them. We felt like we really want to get together with them and do the storytelling and have people say what was really going on with them. And Reverend Barber's Poor People's Campaign is very much based on this idea of testimony. If you can, they're amazing. At a chance, it's but that model is, of course, first-person testimonies, which is what our People's Tribunal was too. And so I'm very proud that we did that for both pipelines in October of 2017. But in any case, small group of people, and Al came when his daughter Corinna came, which was right at the very beginning of the event. And she was part of a little sort of facilitated conversations between people, because I don't know if you've heard, but as soon as we got the ear of the Council on Environmental Justice, and they came to Buckingham and held one of their meetings, and then came out with an advisory to the governor for a moratorium on these pipelines because of environmental justice issues, which they are now disbanded, as well as those 2 air boards removed. That brought Dominion into Union Hill for the very first time. They had all been in Buckingham. They pretended like there wasn't a compressor station. Remember, there's nobody here. There's nobody. Not a community, so who's there to do? But now that we have evidence, we've got this research, we've got tags, we've got the, the attention of the advisory board, they're actually telling the governor not to do this. They start coming in to Union Hill with big fat promises. Like, if you sign up with, you'll get that. And then we were looking at the this and that hiking trail. Will I trade my health and my life and my property value? I guess not. And the various things that they were saying, well, maybe, a rec center. Well, you've got like old people, they're like, that is not really what we want either. So what happened, and that was just a year ago. They started coming in just in March, in the time when the ACEJ met in Buckingham to listen to us. They destroyed Union Hill. I'm here to tell you, maybe Hanuman should be the person that talks about this. The 2 historic black churches are completely divided. Union Hill Baptist, which is where we began, and there would be like 30, 50 people there, not just, of course, from Union Hill, but people from both of those churches and all the other black churches that are around, because these were all in place early days, post-Civil War. They managed to get a particular deacon at that one church and then just kind of build up with that and build up with that. And so the 2 churches are completely divided now. And it's divided along what can be people who have already been given money, literally, and people who are promised money. One of them is the son of that historian that I talked with you about before, whose son had purchased land with a local person and do a greenhouse business, or at least that's what he told me when we were around and doing the study, like, what do you use your land for? Well, we want to have a greenhouse business. And then when there was going to be a compressor station, a huge one right on the other side of the street, Dominion said, well, why don't you put a man cave? Anybody knows about man camps? So this adds to it. Literally right on the street, this compressor station. Well, right on the other side of a 2-lane road, major road, is a ginormous man camp now that's already being built because they were already money by Dominion to do it. So whether they build this ACP or that, they've been paid. And a man camp is talked about in public health, which is my background, as a really huge problem as a sex trafficking, as a source of drugs, people being, of course, on these back roads, 2-lane roads, having drink. They have nothing to do. There's nothing there. The little town of Dilwyn rejected having a man camp there because that's, of course, where they thought would be great because they're all from out of state. I don't know. I could just go on. It's just one after the other. The promise of jobs, there are no jobs for anyone in Buckingham. And we had these young men stand up before the board saying, I need a job. You people that are trying to block, I want this job. But on the night that FERC allowed them to start cutting the easements in Buckingham, we all went out. How many trucks?
A bunch, a dozen probably.
Yeah, 12 to 15 trucks. 15 minutes after the 5 o'clock that passed. So they got all out there. Where were they from, those license plates?
Yeah, Arkansas, Texas, Oklahoma,
Arizona, Utah,
out of state.
Colorado.
Out of state.
We asked anybody here, even the subcontract 4-person meeting it, not a single person from Virginia. But meanwhile, they had known about this so far in advance that they were literally there. They could have been one of the hundreds of people in Buckingham. One of our main sources of income is timber extraction for pulp paper. The only grant or anything that Governor McAuliffe ever did was to give $100 to a pulp paper plate mill in Dilwyn, and now they're cutting everywhere, right? So one thing you got in Buckingham are woodcutters, and they didn't get one single job, even for woodcutting. So those are the people we're dealing with, and the false promises, of these jobs that people so desperately want. So then Tom will take up really important pieces of this. And I hope you're going to talk about the segmentation issue. I'll leave this to you. It's entirely possible, not probable, but it's possible that Dominion's going to segment this ACP because of the difficulties of this section. Oh, this poor little thing. Which is in the darker with the slopes and the problems with doing that, and just want to build from the compressor station and on because they now have another source. He'll explain. Also are building to, and I just feel like I can't just talk about Buckingham. They're building into downtown Newport News. They've already got the pipes in there, and they're predominantly African neighborhoods, and these went in and they were told they were water pipes. They were lied to. These are gas distribution lines that are intended to be hooked up to from, as you saw that right here, tiny little red line. Who made this sign? People from the northern part of the route. Yeah, but anyway, right through downtown, right in front of schools that are primarily black schools, churches, college, hospitals, and the people did not even know it was completely done with subterfuge. So that's a huge environmental justice issue. Going on down south at the Lumbee people, it's 100% Lumbee, 100%.